Hello, my name's John Ennis, curator, producer, Journeys in Design, and we're continuing our sail around the shorelines of Scotland, exploring art, design and industry in coastal communities with a particular emphasis on sustainability as we go on our Salvage Scotland 2020 voyage. So shorelines, the rise and fall, the tides, the flotsam and jetsam, the call of gulls, the smell and the sound of the waves. All this is very evocative and brings many of us memories and nostalgia and very active thoughts of times past. The words flotsam and jetsam are interesting. Flotsam refers to the natural debris of the sea, and jetsam, or the jettisoned, is the discarded debris that is visible at times. And with that in mind, I'm delighted to welcome aboard an artist and an activist and a maker. Welcome on board who has used flotsam and jetsam in her work, Julia Barton. Julia, lovely to see you.
Hi, good to be here.
Thank you for coming on board. So I'm in my virtual boat shed here in Edinburgh, and I know that you've needed to check the tides where you are when you've been going off on your walk, but you're near Ullapool.
Yep.
Yeah, and
right.
just north of Ullapool, and with a view out, for those who don't know, on the west coast of Scotland, a view out to the Summer Isles. Could you give us a little flavour of the scenery as you might walk out yourself?
Okay. So it's on the tops. As you walk down to the coast, it's kind of heathland, moorland, and you kind of walk through a few fields and the bracken. But most of the beaches in this area are actually kind of rocky beaches with pebbles. So as you kind of walk through onto the beaches, you're walking over beautiful cobbles made, which are quartz and Lewisian gneiss and Torridon sandstone, so the pinks, the greens, the whites. So you're walking over like the wonderful geology of time down to the shoreline, and it's that area that I have wonderfully spent the last kind of 7 years working in. Yeah.
Yes, and it's been my privilege to be able to review a lot of that work with you in preparation for today. And interestingly enough, that your first degree was in geography.
Yes, that's right.
A distant shoreline. Where was that?
That was down in Portsmouth on the south coast of England.
Okay.
So yes, interesting that I've kind of worked my way around.
Yes, and I mean you've adventured many a shoreline since, both in the United Kingdom and across in Europe. But as I see it, always with a draw to landscape and growing forms, whether inland or on shore. And it is really remarkable, and it's quite an amazing CV to look through and explore. Performance has been in there, landscape design, sculpture, often with a reusing and reclaiming element and a lost and found element. So it's been very wonderful for me to be able to look through that. So landscape forms and plant minutiae, they're really combined in what you've done. We've gone, as I've seen it, through large to small to microscopic at times. We're at an unusual moment in time at the moment, of course, and I look forward to the time when we can be on the ground together rather than just online. But we've been through this period of lockdown. You've talked about your walk to the shore. It was wonderful. I was in my mind walking with you. But this lockdown period, how has that been for you?
I found it incredibly challenging, like a lot of people, and particularly creatively wise. So in fact, I probably, after years of being kind of on the road and working in coastal communities with lots of people, I've actually been studio based, with myself, with friends that you can see at a distance, but not actually traveling very far. But I found it, I didn't think I would find it as challenging as I did, but I have. But certainly being able to go down to those kind of the beaches and the littoral zones and spend time there has been a way of yeah, kind of re-energizing, but very slowly. It's incredibly slowly, that feel.
Well, thanks for sharing that so honestly. And I think in my discussion with creative minds in this last little while, a good proportion of people have been really quite blocked in their capacity to do their work, but they have found those moments of reflection, testing, and as you're finding, and honestly saying a re-emergence with some new perspectives perhaps, or priorities, but in some respects you've come back to your home in thinking about seaweed, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But in terms of other moments in the field, if you like, that have been instructive for you and perhaps set you on a new journey and path, you did tell me about a time when you were in Madeira, I think maybe 10 years ago. You want to tell us a little about that moment?
Yes, I was walking in the mountains, and until that point, creatively, I had been making large kind of garden installations and sculptures, using many traditional materials like stone and brick and steel. But I was up in the mountains, and I kind of almost had one of those eureka moments that people can plot in their career. And it was early morning, and I was walking it, and there was these beautiful, fantastic cone shapes that were actually gorse bushes that we have growing here as well, and other things. And it was the sheep and the goats, and they had started to reach in, and just because of the kind of the nature of it, the top bit stays the tallest. And these beautiful cone shapes, and it was one of those moments I thought, how come I've never used plants, which I love, as a material? So then they became alongside the stone and the steel. They became an equal partner, and they were a very significant material in my kind of practice. Yeah.
Really, and that was quite a turning point to start.
Absolutely, it was one of those moments that I know that took me off in a different direction. Yeah.
And in following through, those larger forms have always had a microscopic and minute interest for you as well, and that's been reflected in some of the work you've done, and that's both inland and on shore. So you have looked at the smaller plant forms.
Alongside using kind of conifers and alpine plants in the sculptures, I then became interested in using moss, and I developed a way of growing those vertically and using those in sculptures. And the smaller plant forms kind of began to kind of fascinate me even more. And so I began to look at the bryophyte group of plants, which is where the mosses, the simple plant forms, are then kind of, if you like, mixed with the kind of algae. So you get like the lichens. And then as you go through the plant form kingdom into the sea, you get the marine algae. And I've always been fascinated about that plant form going from one environment through to another environment. So it began to take me to the sea, and I began to be very, very interested in seaweed. I didn't know where it was going, how it ever would fit in my practice. But yes, it kind of...
But it certainly has. It certainly has had a fit. And you were very keen to pursue that knowledge base again, and to reinvest in some baseline knowledge. And so you chose to do a seaweed course. Who knew such a thing existed?
Yes, I took a course in Edinburgh, a short course, and which fired me up even more. And we used to go down to the Firth of Forth at Queensferry onto the beaches to begin to identify the common seaweed. And it was from there that I came up here to kind of look closely at the seaweeds.
And was that your first visit to that part of the...
Almost. It was when I was beginning to get to know the Northwest Coast, yeah.
Fantastic. And I think then if I can touch on another moment in the field, perhaps an emotionally charged one, which you described very beautifully to me, and with a lot of poignancy. And that wasn't just about the seaweed that you saw.
Yes, when on this, one of the very early trips, when I was trying to get my identification of the different racks sorted out in my head, I came on a camping trip and walked down onto the beach in the morning to begin to kind of look at all of these plant forms that I wanted to practice the names of and look closely at. But I couldn't see hardly any seaweed on this huge beach. And it was literally smothered with just about everything, domestic, plastic wise you could think, but also commercially fishing wise. So everything was wrapped in plastic. And I just sat down. It was one of those moments where you just burst into tears. There's nothing else you can do. And you just wonder at the world and what we're doing and to the environment. And again, that was another turning point in my practice.
And, you know, that's formed an extraordinary body of work and an extraordinary journey for you, really through shorelines all over the country and working with communities. And you have coined a phrase for this project which links art and science and community engagement, and the word is littoral, and that's from your time as a geographer, or a word you knew from long before.
Yeah, I mean, it also crosses over into, yeah, it's a geographical coastal topography word, and you could roughly define it as the area between the extreme low tide and the extreme high tide. And if you walk across that area, that is the littoral zone, and there are other zones going underneath the water in a more complex way. But it's that area that I have been working in now for the last 7 years, working between the low tide and the high tides. Yeah.
Amazing. And I mean, I would recommend anyone has a look at that body of work. That littoral art project is quite remarkable. And I think your commitment to tell the story and seek a message that people can engage with in a way that they can engage with is extraordinary, and has been incredibly successful given what you've managed to achieve. Collaboration has been a very important part of that for you as well. And I'm going to mention your involvement in World Environmental Day early on in 2014, the Clean Beach Scotland presentation at the Scottish Parliament in 2017, and working alongside the Marine Conservation Society. Now, to give object focus to this work, you have created a series called Litter Cubes. Would you have an example, or could you talk us through what that is about?
Yeah, one of the connections I began to be aware certainly over the last maybe 3 years since the kind of Blue Planet program, that people were becoming much more aware of marine litter pollution, but the connection that people were still failing to, and they understood that it was a danger to marine organisms and marine life, but the connection to the bigger global issues about climate change and our use and non-use and reuse of materials, and our obsession with single-use plastic was kind of still being missed to a certain degree. And so I set out to make a piece of a collection of work that could show directly the nature of what we find in the sea. So this is the cotton bud sticks that we kind of hopefully only used to use.
That's a particularly pertinent litter cube to show us.
Yes, it is, because this one, so I've made a series of very big ones out of bottles, and then I've got, this is a little maquette. This one is actually made out of box strapping. So a series of 7 types of litter I collected, and volunteers helped me collect throughout in 5 different areas around Scotland over the last year. And then I have combined them sometimes with the collaboration and the help of people who were at the events. And the idea being that each one tells a story, a bit like the salvage journey that you're on. And this one tells the story that in here there's something like 650 little cotton bud sticks.
Did
this
that
is a
come
very
from?
common thing wherever there is any coastline close to habitation, like Edinburgh or Glasgow.
So
So
with your
found
cubes, are your cubes, do they reference a place as well as a material?
a lot of them do, yeah. So I know which cube. So there's a bottle cube, bottle cube behind me.
Oh,
That is actually that was actually collected in Shetland. All those bottles. So I've worked with groups there, a bit like what you're saying, working with whoever's on the ground, asking people to help, bringing things in, and working with people.
I
Yeah.
mean that of course is a standing tradition in Scotland where artists based in the communities gather local folk in and contribute to a piece of work. And it's a very significant way that artists do work in Scotland. I think there's some great masters of that, and you've certainly contributed amazingly to that. And you've gone, as you say, I think you mentioned, to clearly 5 distinct shorelines and worked in projects. Can we go back to that?
Oh, the little wee one.
Going to call it earbud cube? Is that what?
No, this it's the cotton bud sticks cube.
Okay, yeah. Right.
So this one tells a very good story. So each of these cubes has a story. This one is a single-use plastic, but by lobbying and public pressure from lots of different groups, the Scottish government and now the UK government has banned the sale of this particular type of cotton bud stick, and the manufacturers have been forced to go back to making this shaft, if you like, out of card. So this will never happen again, hopefully. I mean, we'll be still picking them up for the next 20 years, yes. But the point is that we can do it. We can start to change things around. So the great thing is the education officer, Catherine Gemmell in Marine Conservation, now has one in its own little box on her table, and she can take it to all these events.
And she will reference it.
Yeah, and the volunteers of the Marine Conservation Society actually picked thousands up for me, and I'm still making them, so I still need them. So send them.
Yes, and I'm absolutely going to refer folk to your wonderful websites and to the organisations that you've been highlighting. But that sense of the community engagement of on purpose is so strong in your work. So you've been to these shorelines, and here you're back to, in one sense, your spiritual home shoreline. And perhaps we can just now talk about a return during this period to the seaweed rather than the litter. Tell us a little bit about some of the plans afoot that had to be postponed from this year.
Okay, so one of the great things on revisiting the beaches in this particular period is just to refire my kind of love of seaweed. And it's always been there, and it's been this fantastic counterbalance to this marine pollution. So whenever I walk on a beach, yes, I'm collecting thousands of bottles and various things, but I'm also collecting tiny pieces of seaweed, looking at them under the microscope, playing with them, hanging them up, drying them, whatever. And I knew that at some point I had to celebrate this particular plant form. And so living where I do, I'm part of a community that actually owns an island. And that's amazing. So we own everyone in the area here in Ross-shire owns a community island called Isle Martin, and it's the closest of the summer isles. And I did a lot of beach cleaning there over the years and involving people rowing out back and forth. So it takes about 30 minutes.
It's a little rowing boat to get there.
The island now does own 2 kind of launches that we can take people across. So that's what will happen. So about a year and a half ago, we decided, because this is now the year of Coasts and Waters from the Scottish Parliament, we applied to Event Scotland and wonderfully got awarded a grant, and FLAG and a few other organisations supported us. So we've been plotting and planning an amazing celebratory event So again, crossing over science. So we've got great scientists, marine biologists here that know so much about seaweed and the importance of seaweed and kelp beds as a carbon sink, which kind of connects me back to kind of carbon in my litter. But it's just great. We've got all these wonderful people, and we're going to bring in more experts from the Natural History Museum who look into seaweed, and we've got chefs coming. And so the whole thing is, you'll go across on the boat, you'll start looking at the seaweed, you'll be able to learn to identify at least 5 plants, 5 marine seaweed forms, and have a great time. It'll be such a celebration.
It's a seaweed festival.
Yeah, it is the Isle Martin Seaweed Festival. Unfortunately, because of lockdown and social distancing, it's been postponed this year, but it's definitely going to happen next year.
Julia, it's very exciting, and I really thank you for taking time out to chat about your work with us today. I'm just very excited to come over and be on the ground there. And you did mention in a previous conversation, I wonder if you could just evoke the beauty of it again, of seaweed in certain lighting natural conditions.
So in the kind of darkest moments of lockdown, the best thing to do would be to go down just as the tide is receding. When you know it's turning, walk down, and if the sun comes through, what the fantastic thing is, when the small seaweeds, like the channel rack at the top that tightly holds onto the rocks, as the tide is going out, they're still actually hydrated with water inside them before they dry. And if the light comes at the right moment, you get this beautiful kind of limey green amber color, and it's like the most beautiful jewel to look through. And then if you walk down through the sequence of seaweeds, as you go down, they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you get to the brown seaweeds, the massive ones that kind of like have got arms, the orax and the kelps, and it is, it's just like going into the most wonderful, wonderful world, and it's a great counterbalance to any problems up here.
Yeah, thank you so much for chatting, and I look forward to seeing you.
You're welcome.
On the ground soon.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.